Kelly Eco from The Athletic. I think we have a new nickname for you, and I think it's Biggie Velvet.
Ooh,
we got
man.
Are you excited?
Kelly need to put some pads on.
Welcome to the ecosystem. We are in late July, and if you're an NBA fan, I'm going to apologize. I know we're in the dog days of the offseason. Summer League has come to a crawl. Your favorite team is announcing two-way guys on social media. It's not a great time to be an NBA fan, but hang in there. People are going on vacation. Take some time off. Go to the beach. Go to the park. Read a book. Just anything to take your mind off of NBA basketball. But today, I'm here with my man, S. Actually, wait, S, now that you're here, I got a question.
What's up?
Because I was about to say friend of the show, but if you're a friend and you've never been on the show, are you technically a friend of the show?
Damn. I think the second time I come on, I'll be a friend of the show. I'm a
Okay,
friend of,
okay.
I'm a friend of you right now, but I'm not a friend of the show. You know, that makes sense?
Okay, my man. So S is a very busy man. For those of you who don't know, he does everything NBA, everything, he does everything basketball. He is a consumer of the sport. I ran into you in Vegas, ran into you during the finals. How are you dealing with the post-NBA world right now?
Oh man, I'm relishing in the time off, bro. Like enjoying the little bit of time that we have between next season and this past season that just finished up to just enjoy myself, watch some TV, catch up on some movies, go out, hang out with people, see people for the first time. It feels like that's what happens every time we have an off season. You get a chance to rekindle and match up with people that you haven't seen in a while. That's typically how it is for the NBA world, but that's what I'm trying to do, man. I hope you're enjoying yourself too, Kelly. You're about to be mad busy with the Rockets next year, man.
God. Yeah, fortunately for me, well actually probably unfortunately, I have a hard time completely detaching, and I'm always working on something. It could be like a feature, a longer feature, or trying to do some research for down the line. But it's really hard at certain points to kind of unplug. At some point I will. Maybe that's like in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
After my girl's birthday and everything. But for now, I'm still pretty tuned in. And like you said, the KD stuff is good to, keep me busy here for a while. For a good thing. It's good to be busy.
Yeah.
But we're gonna go through the Western Conference, breaking everything down. First thing I wanted to ask you, are you, and when you look at the league for next season, are you operating under the guise that the Thunder are going to steamroll the Western Conference for the next 5 years, or are you taking a slightly different take to it?
Steamroll is hard, man, because
Exactly.
the scout is out, and I mean that with all due respect for OKC, but like teams now have an entire season of like championship material to base their scout on, right? And match up and figure out ways that they can beat OKC.
Right.
And like truthfully, OKC has a great runway. I was just talking about this on another podcast, but like the runway they have is unique, even though they are going to have some interesting choices over the next couple of years with what they do with Isaiah Hartenstein and Lou Dort. And if they end up extending Case and Wallace, they hope Nikola Topic can be a guy for them. But generally, like I think what they did with the J-Dub extension and with the Chet extension, they provided themselves a level of flexibility and locked in their three core that I do believe they have a runway. Are they going to whoop the West for the next 5 years, though? I can't say that. No.
So the one thing that I did see about this team during the finals and for the playoffs, for that matter, when you look at the regular season, specifically as it pertains to their double big stuff, right? I think Chet and Isaiah played around 700 possessions together, plus 13, it's like 95th percentile. A little less effective in the playoffs. Things slow down. Teams are going to take time to scheme against you and force you to be uncomfortable. The Thunder really staggered their bigs for a lot of that playoff run. And, obviously like the Rockets, they're playing double big and I don't think they would stagger like Steven Adams and Alperen Sengun like that to that effect. But Do you think that strategy, I guess, is more viable in the regular season or the postseason, and why?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think it's more about the long term and why they're staggering those two, because they know that eventually Chet will have to play the five long term full time for them. Because staggering them makes sense right now as Chet grows into his body and figures out what he needs to do to become a full time five physically. But I think eventually they want to get to the point where he is the starting center for them long term. He's playing the bulk of the possessions for them at the five, and they might have other options, where they can go to double big lineups, where they can have different looks, because that's still important in the playoffs. But I think that's the future moving forward for them, is finding a way for Chet to be their full-time five. I still think what Hartenstein brought in the finals and in the playoffs generally was super important as a screener, as like a secondary option for them offensively, is with the passing hub stuff that he does at the high block. But they can find that elsewhere, probably, if they can, go out and get someone else. But Chet is the big part of this equation. It's making sure that he becomes that starting center. It's kind of similar to what the Cavs are doing with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. It's like,
And Mobley, right?
yeah, the plan eventually is for Evan Mobley to take the full-time five spot. But right now, as Mobley progresses, gets his body right, gets to that point where he can be a full-time five, they still need Jared Allen to be there too.
I was talking to a Western Conference exec, and he talked about, the kind of the obsession that teams are starting to pay attention to this double big, and every double big is not created equal. Like every team doesn't have a Chet and Isaiah that can play off each other. Sometimes you'll have in late clock situations, Isaiah can find Chet on a cutter from the corner or with a lob, and they have that synergy. Other teams are built differently, but I guess the thing I'm looking forward to or seeing is if teams try to copy or emulate a similar strategy, how effective will they be? Because you aren't going to find a lot of Chet and Isaiahs around the league that play well together. But do you see that being more of a thing that for next season?
Yeah, short answer is yes, absolutely. Like, even if it isn't as effective, I think teams need to have the option to be able to go to it. Like, if you can't go double big, then you have to force
Yeah.
other teams to go small. That's something the Warriors dealt with, where it's like they just didn't have enough size to deal with the Rockets' issues in the first round. Right, the double big lineup just presented something like they couldn't deal with, and that's what helped the Rockets get into that series and force it to 7. I think most teams need a double big look, but they also need a small ball look. And they also need a look where they can go to a traditional five. You kind of need everything, I think of, and we'll probably talk about them in a little bit here, but the Clippers now have a backup five option with Brook Lopez. They have John Collins in the front court. They can go to maybe not a double big lineup, but they can be bigger in the front court, all while still kind of having that same identity that they have defensively, with wanting to switch a bunch and do things to make Zubats be the main guy, main anchor for them defensively.
And look, the Thunder still have guys in the pipeline too. Like this is like it's almost like Goku in the chamber where you have Topic developing, playing in summer league. You still have AJ Mitchell. You still have Cason Wallace. This is a team that's almost being built to last. And going back to what Clay Bennett and ownership did, putting that big financial commitment together for the foreseeable future, it's kind of hard to see teams that can beat them 4 times out of 7. I mean, obviously there are teams that will push them to the limit. Denver just did. The Pacers just did. But if you're looking at the floor, if this is a floor of what quote unquote potential dynasty is, they're in pretty good shape, going forward. And then you look at guys like Jalen Williams, who taken on. And I've always been fascinated by guys who aren't traditional ball handlers that take on such huge playmaking roles. And I think last season, Simmons had I think 34% of his time spent on the floor as a pick and roll ball handler. Mm-hmm. That's right between Jamal Murray and Fred VanVleet. That's a lot of volume for a guy who has become a two-way force in this league. So this team is set up, for a lot of success. But right under them, I think I have Denver. I think, and their offseason, what they added: Bruce Brown, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Cam Johnson, the Jonas Valanciunas saga. I think we are in such a bad place where the Jonas Valanciunas saga is a thing, and that's kind of where we are as far as entertainment. But hey, this is the NBA.
It
What
is
did you
what it
think of
is.
Denver's offseason off the top?
So, are you ranking them number 2? Is that your choice right now?
I think there are two right now. I think there are two.
Wow. Okay. So I would have had your Rockets in here as number 2, but I'm open to. Okay. So like obviously having Nikola Jokic is the main trump card here, best player in the world, arguably still. And like the way that they have built this team around him is that they can have a lot of offensive options, and the Cam Johnson trade opened up a level of flexibility for them to go out and get that depth, to get Bruce Brown, to get Tim Hardaway Jr., to trade for Jonas Valanciunas, to get off of Dario Saric's contract. They hope Day'Ron Holmes can be someone for them who they missed last year because he tore his Achilles in Summer League. Hopefully he can be someone who fills some front court minutes for them. Maybe Peyton Watson takes a step. Maybe Julian Strawther takes a step. Like generally a team that against OKC went like 7 deep, 6.5 deep in a 7-game series with Michael Porter Jr. with one working shoulder. Now has like
Oh my
8
God.
guys that they can try, 8 guys that they can rely on in a playoff series. I don't know how much you want to rely on their depth because Jonas Valanciunas is not the greatest defender at his position. Tim Hardaway Jr. is not the greatest defender at his position. Bruce Brown is solid, but he's not like a defensive stopper by any means. Um, that's the question I have for Denver's depth generally, but there's no question they got better. And the Cam Johnson, Michael Porter Jr. swap, in my opinion, is the big difference here. You get a guy who fits really well with what the Nuggets want to do, but on both ends of the ball, really. It's just a question of like, can that group figure things out defensively? And I don't know how you feel about that. Like, do you think they have enough defensive juice to play against OKC? We saw it with the zone in the playoffs, but I don't know.
And they got super unlucky like that series because I actually ran into Cam during summer league and he never met him before in my life. He talked to me for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and the biggest thing about my conversation with him was he was talking about schematics in terms of playing off of the Jamal and Jokic tandem, and that to me is the biggest thing because if you go back and watch that series, I was in the building, I was in Ball Arena, or I think was it Pepsi Center? I don't know what the hell it's called.
Yeah,
But there was so every time because
ball.
the Thunder's the yeah the Thunder's defensive scheme was such in a way that they gave up a lot of corner threes. The only problem was that Michael Porter, going back to what you said, he was playing on one shoulder, and there was every time he would miss you could just hear the groans in the arena. So, and then also if you go back to a couple weeks ago, the comments he made about going to Brooklyn and being able to be more of a offensive threat, be more of a bigger role in the offense. That to me is why I think the swap was important because I don't think that Michael Porter Jr. was the happiest at times being that third fill every night. And you kind of see, and to all his credit, he should go out to Brooklyn and want to expand his game. But Cam understanding his role to a T before he's ever stepped on the floor with the Jokic and Jamal is going to be because he was talking to me about being a release valve and having them play opposite side, and you can't double because he's going to be in the corner
True.
wide
Yeah.
open, and he's a sniper, similar to Michael Porter Jr. Just and defensively, he can do a little bit more like than Michael. You can move him around. I think sometimes he's fallen victim to people calling him a 3-and-D guy, like a 3-and-D tenacious wing, and he is a bigger wing. I wouldn't put him in that Dorian Finney-Smith Jr. class in terms of defense at that size, but Cam can move around. He can switch a little bit. He's a solid rebounder for his position, and I think he'll give them some extra juice on the perimeter that they haven't had in a while. Obviously, going back to what you said about Tim Hardaway Jr., he's not really the guy you want to look to for a stop. Or Bruce Brown is nice, but I wonder how much he has left in the tank. Jonas Valanciunas also is a bit slow. He does have some physicality. But people are not talking enough about what Cam Johnson is going to bring to that Denver team. So I
Yeah.
think
No.
that's the reason why I personally have them as a regular season standings wise above Houston. I think
Mhm.
the Rockets will prioritize the playoffs a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, like, I have some of Cam's numbers here, but like 85 percentile, 85th percentile on spot ups, 89th percentile in
Yeah,
transition, 81st percentile off of screens. What's crazy is,
yeah,
and so synergy is kind of weird where their tracking data for cuts isn't the greatest, truthfully. Like, some things that are labeled as cuts aren't really labeled as cuts, and sometimes like if pick and roll ball handler stuff will get labeled as cuts and whatnot. But he only had 35 cuts last season for Brooklyn. It's not like he was asked to cut a ton in Brooklyn just because who is he cutting off of,
Yeah,
but
the
he
spacing,
is
yeah, the
yeah
personnel.
he is going to cut a lot in Denver, and he's going to get a lot of opportunities to do so. And I'm thinking of, to your point, like spacing in the corners. Cam is a guy who is really willing to be that corner release valve, and he can do a little bit more with the ball in terms of just being a passer for them, because Michael Porter Jr., for all of like the ceiling he can hit offensively as a scorer, he was not a great passer, and he was not a guy who can make like that secondary read. And I think Cam can do that for you pretty consistently too. So yeah, excited for
Did
the
you
fit.
put any stock into Jamal's Murray's his minutes spiking up? I think because the previous 2 seasons he was around like 32 minutes a game,
Mm-hmm.
and then last season that jumped to 36, almost 37 minutes a night. Do you put any stock into that? Is that maybe a byproduct of playing for Michael Malone, or how would you
Yeah.
assess? Because obviously there was a change
Yeah,
through the
that's
season.
interesting. I got to look into like what lineups that was a part of, and like did he run more bench lineups? Was he part of like leading a bench group more often? Because I think that was part of their calculus when they didn't have that depth. Because I think you could argue last year it was the worst depth that the Nuggets ever had. Right, they were relying on a lot of young guys, and so maybe that was Murray running second units more often than he was probably asked to do, just to give Jokic a little bit more time off. I feel like we won't see that next season because you have Bruce Brown, you have Tim Hardaway Jr., and those are guys who maybe not Tim Hardaway Jr. as much, but Bruce Brown can handle the ball for you a little bit more. And that'll probably give you a bench unit where you can have JV, Bruce Brown, Tim Hardaway Jr., Cam Johnson, Aaron Gordon, and like maybe that's a unit right there. And you have your Jokic plus Murray plus starting unit that makes you can stagger your rotation a little bit easier because you have more options at the guard spot. But yeah,
I have a conspiracy theory to how to get, if you want the best out of Jokic, and obviously he's played at an outer-worldly level for like the last
yeah,
however many years of his career. I know you saw the video today of him reacting to his horse winning the race.
yeah.
If they were to somehow get some kind of technology to kind of broadcast via satellite in the arena, you could just watch a loop of his horses. There's something to that, because I've never seen a man not give a shit about anything NBA related and want to put his life on the line for some horses. But hey, that's what some of the stars are the stars for a reason. So
Hey Kelly, you're
yeah.
not at the horse racing tracks, man. You don't know, man. These guys, some of these guys.
Is it emotional? Hey, put me on game. I don't know. I've never. Hey.
Listen, I haven't gone either, but I've been told that like some dudes just get locked into the horse races, and it's like a pastime for them, and it's something that people do often. So
I've
I
seen the
haven't
movies.
done it
I've
myself,
Perteliat, whatever it's called. Yeah.
yeah. So look,
Oh yeah.
I would be down. Maybe they should like live stream horse racing games, or maybe his specific horses onto the
Oh,
ball arena. Why not?
that's what I'm saying. He's already
I see
changed the
you.
culture there enough.
I see you.
So
That's part of
I
the
guess,
ecosystem. Yeah,
come on, man. Come
yeah,
on. Come
yeah.
on.
I see
Too loud. You're too loud with that.
you.
But the team right after Denver, obviously the Houston Rockets, huge summer. Started with the KD acquisition. When you look at Houston's half court numbers, and they were pretty bad last season, do you believe that simply inserting KD to the equation fixes the majority of their issues, or is there going to be a little bit more work that has to be done to ease the transition process? Because this is KD off the back end of his career. He's still one of the most efficient lethal players to ever touch the earth. The Rockets, even though they had a mediocre offense, they still had a way of doing things, and those are
Mhm.
still human beings. They're athletes. They have habits. They're creatures of habit. You have to kind of unlearn some of that. Do you think that process is going to be as quick as people think it will be?
There might be a bit of a learning curve learning to play with KD, because what the offense was last year for them, even though it wasn't necessarily the most efficient offense in the league, What I have it here, but they were 22nd in half court offense. Like their offense predicated on a lot of pick and roll with Jalen Green and Şengün, or Fred VanVleet and Şengün, and
Right.
post ups for Şengün. I think that wholeheartedly changes because Kevin Durant isn't a guy who runs a ton of pick and rolls. I don't know if you saw he was working on his playmaking out of pick and rolls. He dropped like a workout video today or
Yeah, I saw
yesterday,
that.
whatever it was. Yeah. And he was working on his playmaking out of pick and roll. So maybe he does end up handling the ball more often in Houston than he did in Phoenix, where he was more like catching the low block, catching the high post area, and operate that way. But I do think he will pretty quickly figure out how to work in their system, just because look, last year, I have it here, but Rockets were 18th in clutch offense, 16th in clutch net rating. I don't need to tell you these things, but you know this, like 23rd in fourth quarter offense, 19th in fourth quarter net rating. Like the end of games, they just didn't have a clear cut option to go to. It was a lot of Fred VanVleet Hail Marys. It was a lot of Jalen Green Hail Marys. It was Şengün trying to figure something out in ISOs. And Kevin Durant is 10 times the option that those are in terms of the offensive output, especially in clutch time. Like, this is a guy who was top 10 in clutch points last season, third in efficiency among those top 10 players. Like, KD will immediately get in there, and you should trust the infrastructure around him to compete in games up until that point to give him the opportunity to close out games for them.
When you look at, the spacing that he's going to provide, to your point, it should make things a whole lot easier, because there were times, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of teams were going zone against them, because they understood that
100%.
the floor spaces that they have, quote unquote, are streaky shooters at best. And if you are able to clog the paint or force them to beat you from the outside, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a positive result as a defense. So now having KD, if he's going to handle the ball, if he's going to play off of, an LP or Steven Adams or Capella, and have, Dorian Finney-Smith, Jabari one side, Fred trailing, it's going to be a lot for defenses to, and especially if they can figure out a way to get the best out of Jabari and KD, because, as KD is the mid-range maestro for all intents and purposes, Jabari is still developing that. But if you watch that Golden State series, he was getting to that shot a lot, and he was converting at a pretty efficient rate. So, and I talked to Jabari about this in summer league, but trying to figure out how best to get the most out of those guys is going to be the biggest sign for me. But I do think that adding KD to the mix, to that defense, should make things a lot easier from a half court. But for you, the question I have, because you also covered the Warriors for a bit, during that whole 2 timeline approach where they had Moses Moody, James Wiseman, Jonathan Kuminga. Is this the same thing? Because obviously that didn't work. That didn't work for obvious reasons, because James Wiseman.
Yeah.
But it's very different having an Amen Thompson, an Alperen Şengün, a Jabari Smith, and compared to a Kevin Durant, Fred VanVleet, those 2 timelines. So it's a very different thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, if those young guys weren't already competing at a high level, and they weren't already like winning games off the backs of like themselves, now I know they needed Fred and Dylan, and those guys were really important to like set up the culture and winning infrastructure and whatnot. And I know you've written about that a bunch, but like, those dudes were playing at a high level, right? Amen is playing at a high level. Şengün got to be an all-star last year. Jabari, who dealt with injuries last year, I think was really important to what they did in the playoffs, and like was maybe their like 4th or 5th best player in that series against the Warriors. I would probably argue. I don't know. It was like maybe Adams, Fred VanVleet, Şengün, Thompson, and Jabari. Like, those are probably the main guys that were great for them. So I just think there's enough there from the young guys where you can bank on them being good by themselves and like developmentally. There's like the floor is the ceiling for a man, right? You know what I mean? Like, he can absolutely, in my opinion, he can become an all-star level player, and he's already on that trajectory without Kevin Durant. Adding KD just amplifies everything that they want to do. It makes life easier for these younger guys to get to their spots. And I can't think of a better player for Jabari Smith Jr. to learn from, because KD
For
is a
sure.
guy who has no wasted movements, does not dribble a ton. And Jabari is a guy who needs to work on his ball handling, but if he can figure out a way to score without necessarily handling the ball a ton, Kevin Durant is a perfect maestro to learn from in that regard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you brought up a man, and this goes back to a conversation that I had last week. Somebody was on the podcast with the Rockets Collective. Shout out to the guys over there. They were talking about the very real prospect of a man being a top 25 player next season. So I went to the Ringer. I know the Ringer published like a top 100 list last season. Number 25 on that list was Jaren Jackson Jr. Number 24 on that list was Jimmy Butler, and 23 was Pascal Siakam. My question to you, S,
Man.
do you think if a man takes a leap next season, or given where he is right now, could you not make an argument that you would probably take a man over one of those guys, or is this always still too early in his career to make that claim?
So Pascal just had like an awesome year, finals run,
Yeah,
all-star,
right.
et cetera, et cetera. Jaren, for all intents and purposes, I know he had like a shaky end to his year, but like was a really good basketball player last year.
He was super good.
He was awesome. And who was the third player that you mentioned in that list? Was it Jimmy Butler?
Jimmy
right?
Butler was
And
24.
like, yeah, Jimmy Butler's obviously like on the older side of things. You don't know if you'll get that same production from him, but he was really important to what the Warriors did second half of the year. Will Amen Thompson be better than those guys? If that happens,
It's hard to say without the jumper yet. It's hard to say.
I was about to say, yeah,
it's
it's
hard
like
to
he has to have like a consistent scoring method to the madness, whether it is the jumper or whether he just like consistently gets to the rim, is hunting down those drives, like is working so well off of KD where he gets to like 20 a night just based off of cuts, just based off of attacking closeouts, just based off of working in transition. Maybe that's the world where we live in, where like it's so easy for him to do everything else that he doesn't necessarily need to improve as a jump shooter or kind of like on ball scoring option. It's crazy to me that like even when teams go under on pick and rolls, he uses that as a jump start to kind of like just barrel his way to the basket. I think it's one of the most like ingenuine things that he does. Even though he's not a good shooter, he still finds a way to maximize his space. I love him, man. I think he's my favorite player on the Rockets. Like, I would love for him to become a top 25 player. I just don't know if it's in his cards next season. I could see like he's top 50 for sure. Top 35, I could see probably makes sense. It's just hard with KD taking up a lot of the usage with, I guess Fred VanVleet is going to take some of the on-ball reps and some of the on-ball opportunities too. Just hard to envision him like slotting in usage-wise to get the amount of opportunity to be a top 25 guy,
Yeah, I think it's still a good problem to have if you're him. Given
absolutely.
he's coming off of a second year I think if he's able to, and he's been working this summer on trying to tighten up the ball handle, because at times we saw like the Warriors are a smart defensive team. They understood that if a man is trying to get to the rim, trying to pinch at the nail and cut off those angles is probably a good strategy, because he's going to try and barrel through because he's that physical, he's that fast. But, they were able to, I guess in game like 6 and 7, they were able to kind of have more success with that. The next tier of teams after that, and you brought it up earlier, the Clippers. I want you to sell. I have my own thoughts. I want you to sell me on the Clippers right now as a sleeper in the West.
Yeah, like look, no question they're old. Think Law Tech tweeted this out, but like they have an average age between their core of like 32 and a half or something like that. That's pretty old. Like that's really, really old. Like Zubac is the youngest of their core rotation players, and he's 28. So I understand the skepticism that way, but they are a deep team. And they will have a full healthy season of Kawhi, fingers crossed, right? Of course, that's obviously something you have to factor in.
Knock on some wood.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Trading Norm Powell, I think was a risky play for them, truthfully, but they knew that Bradley Beal was on his way. Like, Norm was a guy who averaged 20 for them. Can Bradley Beal do the same thing? I think Brad had a really down year in Phoenix. A lot of people are low on him. I would be curious to see how he answers back to that, because it was tough in Phoenix last year to watch him, truthfully. I love the Brook Lopez signing. I think he brings exactly what they need at defensively. Like he's a drop big. I think the defensive infrastructure of the Clippers will make more sense for what he does, because you'll have, Chris Dunn and Kawhi and Derek Jones Jr. like locking and trailing, and it'll make his life a little bit easier. And he's not going to be playing 31 minutes a night like he did in Milwaukee. He'll probably be playing like 15, 20 minutes a night. That's my pitch. My pitch is that they're deep. Even though they're old, like they can go 9-10 deep, and that will be enough in the Western Conference to be competitive. Ty Lue is a hell of a coach, and basically every single
super
season,
underrated.
Yeah. And like every single season, we think that this team might not be as good as they are. They end up being good because he helps them punch above weight. So I think the Clippers are absolutely a dark horse. Yeah.
When you look at because James took on a huge playmaking load, and he has done for his entire career. But adding Bradley Beal, to a lesser extent, adding Chris Paul, that should in itself make things easier. Now, we don't know what the situation is between James and Chris, if they've buried the hatchet from all those years ago. But I do think from a basketball perspective, if you were talking about sharing some of the usage, there's a way to maximize or enhance. Because Chris was, I think he played all 82 games last season. The shooting is always going to be a streaky thing with him, I think. But assist to turnover ratio is always going to be positive. He's always going to be an excellent table setter. Bradley Beal can play making a pinch. It's not the sexiest, but he can get the job done. I think the Clippers have, to me, my favorite addition is the Brook Lopez thing. I think when you were watching Brook at his finest, he was picking and popping from 28 feet, cashing threes like it was no man's business. If he can bring even a little bit of that to the Clippers, I think their tool bag gets a lot deeper. So I do see why people are buying a lot of stock in the Clippers. Where do you see them finishing, like standings wise?
Yeah, like around here, probably. I think the big question is Kawhi's health. Like, because I really like the approach that they had last year, where they brought him in slow. He basically started his season in January, and he got like 2.5 months off to just get his body right and get as healthy as possible. And it gave him that extra window to actually play in the playoffs, be healthy in the playoffs, etc. I don't know how they approach it this season. Are they expecting him to play 65 plus games? Do they want him to play 65 plus games? Are they resting him in back-to-backs? All of these things are kind of questions with how they approach Kawhi to me. But on a note on like Brook Lopez, John Collins, and whatnot, the Clippers were 15 points per 100 possessions worse with Zoo off of the floor last year. Like, now you have a floor, you have a competency with Brook Lopez, with John Collins, and like that should elevate them in the regular season a little bit too, because when Zoo sat, they were just not the same team. Like he was an all-star level, all-NBA type of guy. If he can continue replicating that, if Harden has, Beal and Chris Paul to alleviate some of the ball pressure or ball handling pressure, they should be like 4, 5. They could get all the way up to like 1 or 2 in the West if things really go well, truthfully. Like that's why they're a dark horse, right? If everything goes well, like they can compete for a championship, but there's a lot of questions to if things do actually go well for them.
It seems like they're a dark horse every year. It's always been like for the last, but any team with Kawhi, you will put that in that light. But I still think there's still a difference between the Clippers and then their neighbors, the Lakers. Like I would put, and we can go quick around, the Lakers, Memphis, Phoenix. For LA, I guess the biggest question for me is what version of DeAndre Ayton are they getting? Because
for sure.
We've seen what it looks like when DeAndre is checked out. I think the Portland stuff was weird. It was always something extra going on with him in Portland, and maybe that's just the way organization they were set up at the time because they were trying to develop young guys. And it seems like a lot of teams they get stuck in these like 2 timeline things and it never really works out. But I think coming to LA, being able to play with LeBron, play with Luka, now you add Marcus Smart, Jake LaRavia. I think LaRavia's on-ball defense as a point of attack defender, he was solid. He's not the greatest, but he can get the job done. Do you think that's enough of a summer that would A, appease LeBron, 2, give them a legitimate shot at contending in the West?
Man, the appeasing LeBron part is so tricky because
Yeah.
like, is this team good enough to compete with the 4 teams we just talked about? Like in the when you have Luka Doncic, you have a chance, right? Just because of how high
Sure.
his ceiling is and what he can reach. But infrastructure wise, I don't know if I trust the Lakers as much as I trust the 4 teams that we talked about in OKC, Houston, Denver, and the Clippers. Like, can they defend at a high level next season with Ayton? And is he a viable, like, he's obviously an upgrade from Jackson Hayes or having no center, but is he viable for a team that has Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves at the point of attack? And losing Dorian Finney-Smith and adding Jake LaRavia and Marcus Smart, like, are those 2 guys? I like the LaRavia signing, truthfully, but how much of a difference maker is that going to be in the Western Conference when the guys we just talked about on the wings are like Dorian Finney-Smith, coming off the bench, and Tari Eason, and in OKC, obviously they have tons of wing depth, and the Clippers have their own level of wing depth. Like, how does that match up with what the Lakers want to do? So I think the Lakers got better this summer. Did they get better enough to compete in the West? I don't think so, to be honest with you.
I think I would put them. Would you put them playing? Because last season it was only 4 games separating second from 8th. So I do think we could be set for a similar looking, like, scrunched up standings.
I would put Minnesota and Golden State ahead of them. How do you feel about that?
Minnesota and Golden State. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
But they're both in the same-ish area. Like I wouldn't be surprised if you told me tomorrow, next year the Lakers are going to be the 4 seed or 5 seed, but I could also see them falling into 7-8. Yeah.
I think I have the Wolves and the Warriors in that weird category. Like, they could a lot of movement. Real quick on Minnesota, where do you stand on their playoff? The Western Conference Finals was a dud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think, because we've seen teams that ascend gradually and they get to a point they get embarrassed and they never recover from that? I think Ant is still young enough where you can conceivably put them in that mix for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I noticed about them in that series was their pace. Sometimes their pace got out of control, and a lot of actions that they did with Ant were trying to get quick things going. And I understand the science behind it. I just think that part of it is Ant was taking on too much of responsibility. Jules had just come back, and it didn't work out. But where do you see Minnesota over the next 2 years, as particularly pertains to Anthony Edwards' trajectory?
Yeah, they've kind of painted themselves in a corner with everywhere outside of Anthony Edwards.
For sure.
To your point, like, he is the beacon for everything they want to do, but they just extended Randall, extended Naz Reid. They have Rudy Gobert, and they don't necessarily have any replacement for him once he becomes washed. You know what I mean? Like, because that's around the corner eventually. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like I like Jean Beringer, who they drafted, and he was pretty good in the summer league. Like, he had some flashes, but he's still a ways away from being a starting level center and a ways away from becoming like a defensive player of the year, Rudy Gobert type of guy for them. So they need to find an identity, and they're relying on some of these younger players to step in and fill the role of a lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Like, Rob Dillingham has to step into a bigger role for them. Terrence Shannon Jr. has to step into a bigger role for them. Like, these ancillary guys are probably going to be playing rotation minutes for them next year. That is my main question for Minnesota next season. It's like, can those guys step in, be a part of a playoff rotation? Can Chris Finch kind of create an identity for them despite losing Nickeil Alexander-Walker and maybe a down year for Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley and like them just losing a step? How does that look? To your point, that's why they're a bit of a wild card. Like they have the potential to go toe to toe with some of these better teams, but they just have so many questions ahead of them. I will say Julius Randle got traded at like a day before training camp last year, and they now have an off season to like get acclimated and figure out how they can incorporate him a little bit easier.
That time is important.
Yeah, maybe some time will help them look better offensively. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for Golden State and the whole Kuminga fiasco, I think it certainly has the potential to be a distraction for them. But when you talk to people around those guys, the Brandon Pajemskis, the Kumingas of the world, they say the same thing. Like the way the moment it will click for those players is when the reality of where their game is meets the perception. Because those two guys, they carry themselves at they're extremely self-confident, is the best way to put it. When you're trying to incorporate that into a team that has been a dynasty for years and they are now coming off the back years of the back end of that, still trying to compete, you still have Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Jimmy Butler, you're always going to have a chance. Where do you see the Kuminga saga ending? Like, is there ever going to be, are we ever going to be at a point where there's a happy solution and he's going to ride off into the sunset either as a Warriors player, or do you think it's destined to end in a separation?
I think the best solution, the best end to this story is for Jonathan Kuminga to be on a different team, because there's so much added baggage from Steve Kerr benching him to the conversations about like, hey, we're not going to play Jonathan in the playoffs, and then he eventually plays in the Houston series because Jimmy gets hurt, and he plays in the Minnesota series because Steph gets hurt, and they need that offense. And I think the expectations have never been there for him, or at least the leash has never been there for him. It's been a short leash, very, very quick for him to like, he makes a defensive mistake, they pull him quickly. He makes an offensive mistake, they pull him quickly. And that's just a hard environment for a dude who is very clearly trying to experiment with his game, figure out what he can be. I think he just needs to go somewhere where there's lower stakes of basketball, whether that's Utah, Washington. Honestly, I've the Sacramento rumors are interesting because I think the Kings are also in a place where they're trying to be competitive, but maybe the expectations there are a little bit lower. I don't necessarily see the fit, truthfully, with him and Sabonis, but I don't know how you feel about any of that stuff. But like generally, I think it would make sense for Kuminga to just be on a different team next season, man.
I think the Kuminga Sabonis is clunky because he's not a good enough spacer or a. Kuminga has always been that kind of player where he genuinely believes in his heart of hearts that he's an all-star. He carries himself like that. He plays like that with the ball in his hands. He never really learned to play off of other teammates. And because if you look at it on paper, he should be a hand in glove fit with whatever they're building in Golden State alongside Jimmy Butler. You can switch matchups and have different point of attack ball handlers. It just never worked out. So I struggle to see how putting him with a extremely talented, bright player in Sabonis, how that would. He would get frustrated a lot because there are some things you have to seed as an offensive player when you're playing around other great players. Like you've been around Kawhi. Those certain players have to adapt their games, not the other way around. You got to adapt to them.
Yeah, 100%,
so
yeah. And
I guess for me, like he has to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like, that's the thing that's always been the case with Kuminga. It's like if you can't do it with Steph next to you, if you can't do it with like Draymond and Clay
So Hall
next
of
to you,
Famers.
it's tough to see him doing it to anybody else. You know what I mean? Like I kind of wish selfishly that like Brooklyn or Washington or Utah or whoever takes a swing on him just to see lower stakes basketball, we're not trying to win any games. We're trying to develop, and maybe you can get the opportunity to see what potential you have. And also, that'll help him realize, like, oh, maybe my expectation of being an all-star level player isn't what I actually am in the league. Like, that learning curve will happen naturally if he gets the opportunity to do so. You know what I mean?
I'm trying to imagine the Kuminga in Washington, and if you go back to a couple of years ago, you remember whenever they had James and Chris, and there was complaining about there's only one basketball, but that with Kuminga and Cam Whitmore, like that would be that would. But hey, that might work. Like offensively, that might be something that
It would be
it
fun.
works.
Yeah.
Like if you give him time and space and go make your mistakes, and we're channeling all this energy towards you, it could be fruitful. So, outside of those two, outside of those teams, for me, Phoenix. Can we talk about Phoenix for a little bit? I talked to Jalen,
Wow. Okay.
and I mentioned this on the pod. People are asleep on Phoenix. I'm not saying they're going to win 46 games, 47 games.
Okay.
They are going to be in the mix. This is, if you look, you got to peel back the layers a little bit, but there is etchings of a decent basketball team. I talked to Jalen right when the trade went down, and the one thing he kept telling me was that the Suns saw him like running point guard essentially, like with the ball in his hands a lot. And it's interesting because when you look at some of his best moments in Houston was when he was able to make better reads, smarter reads on a quicker as a quicker processor. He's still prone to sometimes, getting caught in the weeds, and he'll try like an elaborate skip pass that goes out of bounds. But if Phoenix can make him a more concise, more effective playmaker, you pair that with Devin Booker, you still have Dylan Brooks, you still have Mark Williams and everything there. I'm not saying it's going to be great. You're not going to find me, waving the flag.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's going to be as bad as everyone paints them to be. It's not going to be a dumpster fire. I don't think so.
I honestly, Kelly, I didn't expect you to bring up Phoenix this early. I did not expect you to bring up, because I like the sales pitch. I like it, but I fail to see it because it's not the whole one ball thing, but like Jalen Green will have his moments where he has to figure out, like to your point, the feel offensively, the playmaking, pick and roll ball handler stuff. And Devin Booker, for all of his talents offensively, all-star level, all NBA type of guy, still isn't like a point guard, right? They don't have someone who's a table setter. Maybe they don't need someone who's a table setter. Maybe they can just, off the backs of those two really talented offensive players, like they can just score a lot. They can shoot a lot. And hopefully Mark Williams has a healthy year. I like their draft pick and Kaman Malawach and Rasheer Fleming. Like, I like what they did at the draft generally. But it's just tough to see this team competing in the West. Like, okay, I'll ask you this. So you brought up Phoenix, but San Antonio, Portland, Memphis. Those are three teams that I would probably still have ahead of them. Dallas, I don't know what's going to happen with them because Kyrie's out till January or February, but they still, like, I feel like they'll still be a pretty competitive.
Memphis is a weird one.
Davis is healthy. Yeah.
So let me dial back. I'm not saying I wasn't putting Phoenix in the
In that
right
category.
under.
Okay, I got you.
No. I was getting ahead of myself, but I was just thinking of teams because look, the Western Conference, you could conceivably think of 12 teams that could win 40, 38-ish games. So if you have Phoenix in there, because obviously, yes, the Grizzlies are going to be a better team. They're a better team right now. If the Spurs stay healthy, I like what they've done. They've had a sneaky under the radar summer. I think they should be better, but I just think that from a defensive standpoint, if you can get, and I'm not sure how much actual impact Dylan Brooks is going to have next season, because if you saw last season, his defense kind of regressed a bit, and that's kind of what led to Amen Thompson rising and other guys becoming more important. But from a culture standpoint, I think that if you can give them a plan for the future, if you can give them, actually turn the page, there is something there. I'm not saying they're going to be an eighth seed. I'm not saying they're going to be a ninth. They might not even be a playing team. I just don't think that they're going to be this 26 and 56 team that everyone's kind of painting them to be. I think they're going to be much better than that. But going back to what you said about the Grizzlies, weird summer for them. Ty Jerome, to me, does a lot of what they've needed for a while in terms of another guy besides Ja to create. And Scottie Pippen Jr. has done that admirably for his level. Ty Jerome is a better player. I think he can do more. You can give him more responsibilities. The Contavious addition, I'm still kind of iffy on that because he's coming off a down year. Maybe if he can get back to his typical 40% level of production from three and, be a flying around defender, I can see that. My biggest thing is it's clear that the Grizzlies are moving in the direction of Jaren Jackson Jr. He was their best player last season. Previously, everything was built for Ja. It's looking like the best way forward is not that like Ja has to be the Robin to the Batman.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think he's able to fulfill that role?
Well,
And
first of all, like it's crazy, thinking back to like 2021, 2022 Grizzlies, pre the year where they had the injuries and everything. And we were looking at this team with this wild window to compete in the Western Conference. Ja said they'd be
yes,
fine in the West. John Morant is like one of the most electric players. So to have this conversation now, 4 years later, where it's like this is
is
not
pretty jarring. It's very
it's
jarring.
it's wild to have that conversation because yeah, I mean, look, Jaren is definitely he was their best player last year, and the offense got catered to him, and what he brings defensively is obvious. Um, I wonder, I wonder if the new head coach in Thomas Isalo, like, what if he is going to cater to Ja more because of the pick and roll stuff that he likes to run, and with a full offseason to figure out how this team works, maybe it is like maybe that firing was made in mind. The Taylor Jenkins firing was made with the intention of like prioritizing Ja more.
Yeah.
That said, I don't know. Like I'm sure you would know more about that, but I'm kind of curious to see like overall per, what the overall goal is for this Grizzlies team. Where in the Western Conference, like we've talked about, there's 12, 13 teams that probably think they're a playoff team, and if you do have injuries to Ja's going to miss 20 games a year. That's basically baked in. Like if you do have an injury riddled year for if the core isn't working, do you pull the plug on that? Like, do you decide to pull the plug on that? That's kind of something I'm curious on because they now have the option to do that with the Desmond Bane trade and the picks that they kind of recouped in that too. You know what I mean?
I do like the fact that Isalo wanted to coach his team in summer league because it's pretty rare that you see NBA head coaches do that. But he wanted to embed himself as much as possible. Got to see Jalen Wells, Gigi Jackson, seeing how they've progressed. If you do continue on this trajectory of catering to Jaren, it really comes down to what you said. How much love or how much responsibility does Isalo put on Ja? Because Ja is at his best when he's playing free and fast, and he can freelance, and he's not put in within the confines of a structure. Isalo is all about structure.
Mm-hmm.
He's very structured from this pick and rolls. Everything is intentional. So with the ball movement, the spacing, everything has a purpose. I want to see what that looks like, and do they feel the effects of Desmond Bane's departure? Because I think that was a big loss for them.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
That's the big thing for me.
Yeah, I agree. And they're like banking on player. Like they lost Cole Anthony. They obviously bought him out, and KCP is the main guy that they're bringing back from that trade. And to your point, like he did not look good last year for Orlando. Really struggled to shoot the ball. This is a team that
Yeah.
also lost Luke Kennard too, another good shooter. Like, where is the shooting going to come from? Maybe Cedric Coward, their rookie, who is a multi-year college guy. Like maybe they believe in him to step into the rotation immediately. They do have depth behind him of like younger players that are interesting. Kept Senti Aldama. I'm like, there is the machinations there of the Grizzlies being a good team in the Western Conference. Like they won 48 games last year. Um, it's just there's also a route for the bottom to fall out, and I wonder if that ends up being the case just because of how competitive the West is. You know.
You mentioned Portland earlier. Are you a Blazers believer? I'm starting that phrase this season, Blazers believers, because
I,
it's a lot of y'all.
I'm a crazy Blazers believer. So like you even on the pod with Dave and Zena, since like January when they had their little win streak, I'm like, this is the beginning of a team that's going to be good next season. Because like, yeah, you know what, Kelly, you saw it with your own Rockets team and covering the Rockets. Like there was a stretch at the end of 2 seasons ago where
Yeah, they
they
were
played
competing.
500 basketball, they were
Yes.
competing, and it's like, okay, there's something here. They figured something out, and then
Yeah.
they come in the year after and they obviously take that huge leap. OKC, right? They made the play in a few years ago. You figured out like, okay, from the play in they have something here. From the play in, make it to a playoff spot. Boom. Now they're NBA champions. Like I'm not saying the Portland Trailblazers have that level of ceiling, but I think there's a world in which like they have the defensive infrastructure. They obviously traded for Drew. They signed Dame. They're trying to get adults in the room again. I think that'll help them with their younger guys. It'll provide them a little bit of structure, even with Dame not playing. Like it'll have another guy for Scoot Henderson to talk to. I just think Portland's going to be feisty. The questions for me with Portland is like offensively, who are they going to go for? Like who's the guy for them offensively? Because um,
It's not going to be Drew. They
it's
lost
not going to be Drew.
Simons.
They lost Simons. Like, is it going to be Shaden Sharp? Is it going to be Denny Avdia? I don't know, to be honest with you. Is Scoot going to take a leap? Or are they expecting Scoot to take the leap? I don't know what the answer is there, but
Yeah.
I think they're going to be a good defensive team, and that'll be enough in the regular season to win them games. Yeah.
In San Antonio, we're going to move to San Antonio for a little bit. You watched Summer League. You saw how electric Dylan Harper was. You saw the tenacity that Carter Bryant brings defensively. When you're looking at their depth chart, because they tried, playing Chris, Stephon. Obviously, Darren Fox came in. I'm not sure about the 3 guard thing in San Antonio, just because of I think it makes more sense to bring, Harper off the bench with the second unit. Let him run with Keldon Johnson. Let him, run with Kelly Olynyk there, Luke Cornett. Do you see, because if you look at San Antonio, they won 12 more games this season than last season. Now they're finally under Mitch Johnson, who's building the team in his image. They want to play with pace. They want to get a bunch of threes up. They want to give Wemby as much space as possible, and they have different combinations of bigs that can play alongside of him. They have the Olynyk. They can go with that. If you want to go with Cornett, that's a terrifying rim protection right there. Cornett and Wemby.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you see this team going in terms of how high Wemby takes them? Is he able to actually parlay this crazy summer he's had and turn that into actual production for them?
Yeah, becoming a monk, like
Playing chess in the
playing
rain and stuff like.
he's you know what? There's one thing I appreciate about Wemby. He's doing like the old school thing where he does side quests in the off season. Like
yeah,
that.
yeah, he's doing that.
I remember reading books and it was like, oh yeah, Wilt Chamberlain is gonna go and do this in the off season, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he's playing in he's in this karate movie or whatever. You know what I mean? Like Wemby is kind of doing something similar to that, where he's just doing random things in the off season to have fun. I'm glad he's back and healthy. He got cleared for basketball activities, and he got cleared to be able to play. So that's the best part here. The fact that hopefully we're going to have a fully healthy season of Victor Wembanyama. At his best, I think he can eventually, like he was on pace to be a first team All NBA player last year. At his best, he could be another first team All NBA player again this year. He just needs to stay healthy, play 65 plus games, and he probably ends up doing that. He probably ends up winning Defensive Player of the Year too if he does that. So like when you have a player of that caliber, the rest becomes pretty easy to figure out how to win and build a winning team around him. They have the defensive infrastructure to be really talented. and they now have a full offseason to incorporate De'Aaron Fox. I think that was really important. They were working on the fly really in the. I honestly I don't know how many games him and Fox ended up playing together, just because when he got there very quickly afterwards, Wemby got shut down with the blood clot injuries, and so there's maybe like 4 or 5 games, maybe 6 games,
It was
maybe
like a
10.
8-game overlap. Yeah.
Where Fox and Wemby were together. Now they have a full training camp to figure out how those two can play together. I think the fit makes sense. And to your point about the 3-guard lineup, like we saw in the playoffs, how important ball handling was, secondary ball handling, secondary creation. Maybe the shooting isn't there with Dylan Harper and with Steph Castle, but at the very least, there's ball handling. And I think that will work if you have Wemby as a release valve who can knock down shots. Harrison Barnes, who's a competent 3-point shooter. Hopefully they have Carter Bryant, who can knock down threes. I don't know how much he plays into their rotation. Devin Vassell can shoot the ball. The main question for them will be shooting and spacing, but I think there's a world in which like they can hang their hat on the defensive side of the ball and win a bunch of games that way, just because Wemby is great.
Before I let you go, thoughts on Cooper Flagg, Summer League, what that looks like next season. He was taking on some more playmaking responsibilities. He talked about that being the first time, one of the few times he's actually been in that position as a jumbo playmaker. Do you think they have enough in Dallas until Kyrie gets back? They added D'Angelo Russell. Can they hold the fort down? And what does holding the fort down mean? Does it mean they're treading water at 500, or what does that mean? Like staying alive until Kyrie comes back? What does that look like for them?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Little shameless plug here, and I know you've done one of these too, but I did one of those video essays for The Athletic for Cooper Flagg and like the point guard journey that he had in Summer League. They experimented a lot, and I'm kind of intrigued for them to experiment more with him with Kyrie out. Just let him have the ball and see what he can do. He was an excellent playmaker in college. Maybe he doesn't become that year one, but just giving him that opportunity early they'll kind of reap the benefits of that later on in his career, just because he will have the ball in his hands eventually more often. How Dallas does, I think, again, health. Like, is Anthony Davis healthy? Can they have, because I think D'Angelo Russell, for what it's worth, like very flawed player, but solid stopgap guard, like can get you 20 points on a random night against the Hornets. You know what I mean? Can get you 25-5 against the Raptors to pull out a win. Like there's a world in which he can do enough for you in the regular season to win a bunch of games next to their core of AD and Cooper Flagg and whatnot. I believe in their infrastructure defensively. It feels like I'm saying the same thing about all of these teams. Like these are really good defensive teams. The upside is health, it's shooting, it's availability. And I think that applies for Portland. It applies for San Antonio. It applies for Dallas. It applies for Memphis.
Sure.
All that group of teams, a lot of it has to do with how healthy they are. And that's the difference between them, making it to the bottom half of the playoffs or just being a play-in team or out of the play-in, really.
Shout out to my man S. This was fantastic. We're not talking about the Kings because who cares? We're about to be in August. You can deal with that later. But yeah, this was fantastic. Thank you, brother, for coming on the show.
Appreciate
Catch some break. I know you do a lot of work. You got to take some time off. Get outside, some touch grass, and I'm gonna see you around.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me on, man. Thank you.
Thank you, bro.